In the heart of the Sahara, where daytime sand temperatures routinely hit 160 degrees Fahrenheit, dozens of insulated containers were cracked open one by one. Not weapons, not water. Millions of commercial bees, frozen nearly solid, released directly into the most hostile desert on Earth. No shelter, no flowers, no water source within miles, and then the researchers walked away and left them there for an entire year. Understand what that means. Bees begin dying when hive temperatures breach 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The Saharan surface they were dropped onto was 56 degrees hotter than that. These are not wild, hardened insects shaped by generations of desert pressure. These are domesticated commercial pollinators, the same fragile hyper-managed colonies that power roughly 1/3 of the global food supply. Sending them into a 160-degree sand furnace is not a rescue mission. It is, by every biological standard, a death sentence. But in 2023, a coordinated network of environmental research teams across North Africa did exactly this, backed by serious institutional science and a decade of collapsed pollination data to force a worst-case scenario into the open. What they documented over the following 12 months did not confirm the death sentence. It revealed something that has forced researchers to completely rewrite how they understand survival, not just in deserts, but in every over-optimized biological system on the planet. The mechanism they found has been operating invisibly directly beneath our assumptions for decades. Here is what makes this experiment impossible to dismiss. The colonies that died first were not the weakest. They were the strongest, the largest, most productive, most aggressive hives, the ones built by selective breeding programs specifically designed to maximize output. The colonies that held on were the small ones, the inefficient ones, the ones that, by every commercial metric, should have been culled years ago. The heat did not kill the strong. It revealed something about strength itself that we are not prepared to accept. This is not a story about bees surviving a desert. The Sahara was never the real subject. This isn't only a Sahara problem. The researchers who designed the experiment understood something that most coverage of the bee crisis never reaches. Heat was never the primary variable they were studying. Heat was the stage. The real subject was silence, the specific, catastrophic silence that settles over an ecosystem when its pollination network quietly stops functioning. And that silence is not confined to North African desert margins. It is spreading. During the winter of 2024 to 2025, U.S. commercial beekeepers reported losing approximately 60% of their managed colonies in a single season. Not from one pathogen, not from one pesticide, from the compound pressure of a food system that has been optimized so aggressively, for so long, that the biological infrastructure underneath it has begun to fail under the weight of its own efficiency demands. The downstream consequences are no longer theoretical. In China's Sichuan province, where orchard densities expanded faster than wild pollinator populations could track, farmers now hand-pollinate apple and pear blossoms with small brushes attached to bamboo poles. Row by row, blossom by blossom. One of the largest fruit-producing regions on Earth is running on human labor as a direct substitute for a biological process that took millions of years to evolve. That is not an edge case. That is the direction the system is moving. Scientists call it a pollination collapse spiral. Fewer flowering plants mean fewer foraging opportunities. Fewer foraging opportunities mean colonies starve. Colonies that starve cannot pollinate. Without pollination, seed production drops. Fewer seeds mean fewer plants the following season. The loop tightens. Each rotation leaves less margin than the last. What makes it genuinely dangerous is that it announces nothing. There is no signal event, no visible threshold. The system simply becomes quieter and then quieter still until the silence is complete. The Sahara was chosen precisely because it is a place where that silence already exists at scale, a live laboratory for the terminal state. And yet, against every model, against every projection built from that data, something in that silence held on. But after several months of observation, something unexpected showed up in the data. The surviving colonies had not adapted to the heat. They had simply stopped being present during it. Thermal imaging equipment deployed across Algerian oasis zones had been recording surface temperatures continuously, and the data told a story that no daytime researcher would ever see. At peak afternoon hours, sand temperatures reached 65 to 70 degrees Celsius. Lethal. Impassable. Every model built on daytime observation confirmed what everyone already believed. Nothing should be foraging out there. And during the day, nothing was. But shortly after sunset, the same sand that had been registering 70 degrees dropped by more than 25 degrees in under 2 hours. The furnace became a corridor, and the surviving colonies had found it. They were operating on a window of approximately 2 to 3 hours after dark, foraging, returning, foraging again, in the narrow thermal gap between the lethal heat of day and the deeper cold of the desert night. The daytime hive was silent and still. The colony looked, to every external measurement, like it was barely functioning. And then the sun went down. The desert flowers already knew. Many arid region plant species release their scent compounds specifically at night. When evaporation rates drop and insect activity, real insect activity, becomes possible. The bees and the flowers had not coordinated this. They had independently arrived at the same solution, and the result was a functioning pollination network that operated entirely beneath the threshold of human observation. A recent review of arid ecosystems found that nocturnal pollinators play a significant role in nearly 90% of studied dry environments. 90%. We have been studying the wrong half of the desert's day for decades and drawing sweeping conclusions about its biological poverty from evidence gathered during its least active hours. The desert was not silent. We were simply asleep when it was working. But here is the detail that changes everything, because not every colony found that window. Here's the part that no one expected. The colonies that located the nocturnal window were not the ones the researchers would have selected. They were not the largest. They were not the most productive. They were not the colonies that any commercial operation in the United States or Europe would have kept past the first evaluation cycle. The hives that survived were small, low population, low output, the kind that modern apiculture has spent decades systematically eliminating through selective breeding programs designed to maximize honey yield, foraging aggression, and colony mass. By every metric the industry uses to measure a healthy, valuable hive, these colonies were underperformers. The large colonies, the ones built for scale, bred for output, optimized over generations to consume resources and convert them into production as efficiently as possible, collapsed first. Not because they failed to find the nocturnal window. Some of them found it. They collapsed because finding the window was not enough. Their energy demands were simply too large for what the desert's 2-hour corridor could provide. They needed more than the margin allowed. And when the margin ran out, the colony ran out with it. The desert did not punish weakness, it punished demand. This is the pattern that arid ecosystem researchers have been circling for years without a clean data set to confirm it. Biological systems under resource scarcity do not reward the most capable organisms. They reward the most restrained. The organism that needs the least survives the longest. Optimization, in the commercial sense, maximum throughput, maximum output, zero slack, is precisely the trait that makes a system catastrophically fragile the moment conditions shift outside the design parameters it was built for. We bred that restraint out of our agricultural bees, deliberately, at industrial scale, and then we put them in the one environment on Earth where restraint was the only currency that mattered. Where are you watching this from right now, and what highly optimized system is running your city? Drop your location in the field reports below. Now back to the data, because what comes next is even more disturbing. The surviving colonies held on, but the Sahara did not transform around them, and that absence of transformation is the most important result the experiment produced. And here's where it gets complicated. After nearly a year of continuous monitoring, the oasis zones where the surviving colonies had established themselves did not bloom. There was no carpet of wildflowers spreading across the dune margins, no before and after photograph, no image that could anchor a funding announcement or travel across social media as proof that the intervention had worked. The Sahara, by every visual measure available to a human observer standing in it, looked almost exactly as it had when the containers were opened. The researchers did not classify this as failure. They classified it as the result. What the surviving pollinator chains had done was not create new life. They had prevented the collapse of existing life. The thin, specialized, extraordinarily fragile web of desert-adapted plant communities that cling to oasis margins and function as the structural foundation of everything else. Without the nocturnal pollination window holding that foundation in place, those plants would have entered the collapse spiral. The seeds would have stopped forming. The root systems would have retreated. The oasis margin would have contracted, slowly and irreversibly, until it reached a smaller stable state with less of everything. Stabilization is not a story. It does not produce images. It does not generate the visual evidence that human attention systems are built to recognize and reward. And because of that, we have spent decades systematically undervaluing it and overvaluing the dramatic, large-scale interventions that produce visible transformation. The most destructive ecological projects in modern history were not sabotage, they were rescue attempts. The Soviet irrigation programs that drained the Aral Sea, the afforestation campaigns across arid Africa that replaced native scrub with water-intensive tree species and broke the shallow root networks holding the soil in place. Every one of them began with the same assumption, that the desert was broken and that the appropriate human response was to make it look like somewhere else. The Sahara was not broken. It was operating on a schedule we hadn't bothered to observe. And its actual job, the one it has been performing continuously, invisibly, for millennia, has nothing to do with what grows inside it. Here's a fact that most people have never heard. Every year, the Sahara Desert exports approximately 182 million tons of dust into the atmosphere, not as a side effect of being a desert. As a function, the wind lifts that dust from the surface of the world's largest non-polar desert and carries it west, across the full width of the Atlantic Ocean, in a continuous, planetary-scale conveyor belt that has been operating for millions of years without interruption. The destination is the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon is the most biologically dense ecosystem on Earth. It produces roughly 20% of the world's oxygen. It cycles water on a scale that influences rainfall patterns across entire continents. It is, by almost every biological measure available, the opposite of the Sahara in every conceivable way. And it is slowly, continuously being fertilized by it. The mechanism is phosphorus. The Amazon soils are ancient and heavily leached. Rain has been washing nutrients out of them for so long that the forest should, by rights, have exhausted its own foundation millennia ago. It hasn't, because the Saharan dust carries phosphorus in concentrations precise enough to replace almost exactly what the rain removes. NASA atmospheric researchers calculating dust transport volumes have estimated that the Sahara delivers somewhere in the range of 22,000 tons of phosphorus to the Amazon basin annually. The forest does not supplement this. It depends on it. The deadest place on the planet is feeding the most alive place on the planet, across 4,000 miles of open ocean, invisibly, continuously, without any mechanism that is visible to a human standing in either location. Our planet is driven by invisible engines. What part of the world are you logging in from? Leave your coordinates in the field reports below. The Sahara is not waiting to be rescued. It is already working. And once you see that, once you understand what a place can be doing while appearing to do nothing, you cannot look at emptiness the same way again. We began this story with a death sentence. Millions of fragile domesticated insects dropped into the most hostile environment on Earth, with no shelter, no food, and no margin for survival. We expected confirmation of what we already believed, that delicate systems collapse under extreme pressure, that the desert wins, that nature, when pushed to its absolute limit, simply stops. We were wrong about almost everything. The heat was not the killer. Silence was. The strongest colonies did not survive. The restrained ones did. The desert did not need to be rescued. It was already working. And the experiment we designed to witness a collapse instead handed us a mirror, and what it reflected was not the fragility of nature, but the fragility of every assumption we brought with us into the sand. Consider what the evidence actually shows. A 160-degree furnace that became a 2-hour nocturnal corridor, a colony the industry would have culled, surviving because it needed less, an oasis that didn't bloom and called that stability a victory, a desert that exports 182 million tons of dust across an ocean to keep the world's lungs alive. Each of these facts, taken alone, is remarkable. Taken together, they form a single, devastating conclusion. The places we have written off as broken are not waiting for our intervention. They are already doing something we cannot see. And our intervention, confident, well-funded, visually dramatic, has more than once destroyed the invisible mechanism we mistook for absence. If the Sahara is not empty, then nothing is empty. That is not a metaphor. That is a hypothesis that holds in every ecosystem researchers have turned serious attention toward. The deep ocean, the Arctic tundra, the scorched grasslands after a wildfire, every place that looks like nothing is happening is a place we haven't learned to look at correctly yet. We spent decades thinking the Sahara was a wound the planet needed to heal. We were wrong, but the Sahara isn't the only place where nature is rewriting the rules. In the deep oceans beneath the Antarctic ice shelf, a completely different organism is running the same invisible architecture, a biological carbon pump so vast that its collapse would alter the chemistry of every ocean on Earth, and almost no one outside a handful of research stations knows it exists. Click the video on your screen right now to see what lives in the dark beneath the ice and what happens to the planet if it stops. Subscribe to join the research collective, and we will see you in the next file. The universe does not owe us legibility.